I am now excited to have a panel that looks specifically at chefs' perspectives on food systems change. Joining this conversation, we have Olivia Hernandez, the chef and founder of Her Hospitality, whose incredible team is behind the food that you're enjoying all today. Let's give a round of applause, please. My longtime friend, Paul Newnham, who is the executive director of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, Chef's Manifesto. No, I'm sorry? No, Paul? What? No, Lamar, sorry. I can't even hear, and people are trying to give me notes, and I am not even making sense. So Paul Newnham, who's the executive director of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, and Olivia are here. Thank goodness. I can't mess this up now. So, Olivia, I do want to start with you. Chefs are, and I just did this to Blue, and now I'm doing it to you. Chefs are in this really unique position to talk about connections with eaters and producers, but we place a hell of a lot of burden on chefs, and you can both speak to this. And is that your responsibility to like teach us all, like, because we can't make our own goddamn decisions?
All right, no. So here's the thing, we want to, we really do. But I spoke about this, and I speak about this a lot with chefs that are also from underrepresented backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're held to the same standard as people with a lot of reach and a lot of PR and a lot of media. And so the average eater will watch a documentary, and this literally just happened to me. One of my clients called and she goes, "Where do you get my chicken? I just watched some movie,
sure,
whatever."
Sure.
And I'm like, here we go. Like right. Every time a new movie comes out, I take a deep breath and I go, here they come.
Yeah.
Because while I personally take it upon myself to buy the good stuff, to support local farms, to go out and meet farmers, to do whatever I can, it is extremely expensive. It takes a lot of time. And when you're an independent operator and you're underrepresented, there's also the fiduciary part where you got to make money.
Yeah.
If you have investors, you got to make money and returns for them. And so I do feel like the weight is extremely heavy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I can't win.
Yeah.
And we do our best. I mean, we really are doing our best.
No,
I think
I know you
that
are.
there are echelons and there's levels, and there's people that are, mom and popping it out there, and they can't afford to do it, and they're held to the same margins. The margin's the same, and some people can give it up and some people can't.
Right. Paul, I know you have thoughts.
Yeah, and look, I just want to, we should give a big round of applause to Chef, who is looking after us and feeding. I was standing there and she was getting texts about food here, as she's about to come on stage. So I just think we do need to celebrate chefs. Chefs play such a critical role. Chefs are running businesses, and I think sometimes we forget that. We think they're superheroes that can come in because sometimes what's happening in the media and solve all the problems. I think chefs have a lot of power. Yes. They can make a lot of choices, but we have to recognize that they're also running businesses, they're connecting and juggling the same food system we're juggling, but they have to make the choices about what goes on the plate, about what you eat and how it's presented to you. You choose whether you put it in your mouth, but how they construct those dishes, the ingredients, the elements that they add are critical for our health, our enjoyment, the impact on farmers and where those ingredients come from. And so they wear a big weight. And that's no matter where you are in the chain, whether you're in charge of the kitchen and directing or you're just starting out. There's choices that can be made. And so I think they play a unique role in helping us drive forward a food system and make connections. And food systems are about connections and relationships, and that's what Food Tank does really well in bringing people together. And you, Danny, and Bernie and the team, you bring people together, and that's going to create a healthy food system. Chefs do the same. They enable conversations at tables. They enable conversations around ingredients.
But I want to point out that what you said is very important. Chefs are not superheroes. You should not be expected to be. We have this celebrity culture of chefs, and we think every chef on TV has $1 million to spend on whatever. That is not the case. And so I just think it's important to bring up. Either one want to comment before we go on?
As someone who is perpetually underfunded and consistently taking the ban, and mind you, with the mission of paying livable wages, that's what I decided, that's the cross I decided to carry. So I'm like, yes, you have great farmed food, farm to table. Also, we pay people living wages. And I will say, sometimes I am disappointed by how we forget the people. Like, real cool, and I said this before, and I don't mean to be rude, but it's real cool when you have a super sustainable, vegan, all the things restaurant, and there's 15 unpaid interns in the back, just like taking 3 buses and living out of motels. Like, we have to find a balance, and I think that's one of the heaviest burdens we carry is trying to find the balance between wages, working conditions, and then keeping ourselves funded to keep doing that, and keeping our people employed.
Look, I think this is really critical, and I think when we look at the system, and just even through today's program, you've seen so many different perspectives. Those perspectives are also weighing on chefs' minds. Yeah. They would love to be able to deal with them all at once. And what I think and what I see with the chefs that we work with around the world that are tied to this program called the Chef's Manifesto is that it's a framework. And we don't need everyone doing everything all at once. We need people that are really dedicated to different principles. So sorting out wages, working on that first, then looking at ingredients, but we need everyone doing everything as well. Yeah. We just need to get more people involved. And so for me, it's about getting people involved, getting people engaged, and in the sector, really starting to address all the issues. And then that will make it easier for us to see the change that we really want to see.
I imagine for you both that it can, and for me too, but not in the culinary world, it's real easy to be preachy. It's not really easy to meet people on their level and sort of explain why beans are important or why living wages are important. Can you both speak a little bit about that? The storytelling of what you do is critical, and again, it's another burden placed on you.
Yes, because then we have to inform. So I do really fancy private dinners, and it's not always a time when I can come out and say, by the way, we're paying livable wages, and I can't always write it on the bottom of a menu. I don't have a PR company that is like putting out articles about this chef pays livable, and it sucks to be an anomaly. Yeah. And we need everyone to join in, whatever your niche is, do it, carve it out, niche, carve it out, do it, get it done. Like, just pick a lane and do it.
I think the other thing that I would just build on what you're saying there, and then I'll answer your question, Danny, but just building on that, it's also on the eater. You might not be able to say, we pay livable wages, but as an eater, do you ask, do they pay livable wages? Just by you asking, there's way more eaters than there are chefs in most tables. If you ask that question, or you ask a question about which farmers do you work with and what are their practices, or how did you think about nutrition in this? Is this good for me? Is this going to help me thrive? There's a lot more eaters out in the world, over 7 billion. Those eaters all start asking questions as they go to their table. We can drive real change. So there's a bit of everyone's got to play a role. You want chefs to be able to step up and solve some of the problems. As eaters, start asking the right questions and start putting your investments, your dollars, where you spend your money into those companies and people that are doing it. Danny, you asked the question about how do you communicate around food, and obviously I care about beans. I've got a T-shirt. They're going to be putting a bunch of beans out there for people to eat. Don't leave just yet. There's enough.
They're really good.
But we really look at how do you think about food system change? And I think sometimes it becomes overwhelming. It's like, I need to do all these things. I think there's some things that we can all do. And these are things that you can find in most cultures around the world. You can find in indigenous communities. There's foods that people have eaten. We're talking about beans. There's seaweed, mushroom. There's different foods out there, millets. These foods are good for the planet. They're really good for your health. They give you the macronutrients you need, the fiber, the proteins, all of the different things you need. And they also are amazing for the soil or for the ocean, depending on where. Well, seaweed can go also on soil. But I think we need to be thinking about how do we help people focus and think about these things and understand them in different ways, not in ways that are polarizing, but in ways that are embracing and bring you into the conversation. And so we've got a campaign around beans to do that.
Paul and Olivia, this question about polarization, are we moving away from it? Because sometimes I feel like we're just making it worse.
I think there's a lot of, people really like to go to different extremes. It feels good to be like, I'm here. And I think over the course of the last couple of years, not gonna lie, thanks to Food Tank, I've met a lot of people with a lot of different missions, and this coming together and talking about how to cook different things and kind of being expected to make sustainable dishes, amazing, cool, fun, trendy dishes. I think it's hard to figure out because there's the fine dining, and then there's what do you eat at home, and what are the decisions you're making at home, and are you holding yourself to the same to those same standards as you're holding me when you're at home, or are you kind of holding me to those standards and then doing what you want your way?
And then bragging about going to your dinners,
Yeah. Thank you. I love you. Please come again.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it becomes a conversation around accessibility, and accessibility and affordability are key.
Yep.
And so I think when we think of solutions, they might start out in innovative fine dining, tables, where people have a little bit more capacity and time to experiment with ingredients and to be able to play. But you've got to then scale them in ways that are actually accessible and affordable. And so, I mean, I'll go on again about beans, peas, and lentils because I see that they're very accessible. They're very affordable. They come in dry form. They don't need refrigeration. You can get them in all different convenient packaging and different ways. They can be soaked and, fermented and sprouted and all kinds of things. But they are one of these foods, when you talk to nutritionists, they will tell you should be eating more of them. And so what I think, though, is often with those accessible and affordable foods, what we've done is we've not valued them.
Right.
And we've made them actually almost seen as poor foods through using them in feeding people in schools, in care institutions and different things. And so then people, when they start to have a little bit more money and choice, they move away from them. We've got to do the opposite. We've got to actually go, you know what, you guys are eating things that are actually good for you, and we all need to join you. And I think this is about equity, and it's about coming together. And I think this is something that we can all sit down and enjoy, and we can get a recipe and we can do that. So to me, it's about how do we come together around foods that are not going to be something that's out of reach for everyone.
I have one little comment.
Please.
One little comment. So being formerly undocumented Mexican, we've been eating beans and rice and tortillas, and we've been eating, I'm just saying, just like our previous speaker was saying, we've got generations of eating sustainably and recycling because we're broke. And so I do find, and that's just my own, look, I have a lot of issues, but one of them is just these things where it becomes a trend, and it's I'm eating so healthy, and Latinos are I'm sorry, that's what I grew up eating. I'm eating the steak now.
Yeah.
And how do we find that balance?
Yeah.
Because we've created a value system to food where it's lentils are cheap. We don't eat those because it makes us look poor.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to, that's exactly right. I was in Mexico a little while ago, or end of January, and they were telling me that actually consumption's going down.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's heartbreaking. I understand, as you said, why, but how do we help celebrate? I think rather than, how do we celebrate the goodness in our food system?
We'll be those hipsters.
Well, you are. You already are. You already are.
We were eating beans before everyone else.
Look at this jacket.
I want to say the designer's Mexican too. Maybe not. But I'm just saying, we've done it. We did it. And it does hurt my feelings when people are oh my God, have you tried these beans? I'm all my life. Thank you. I love them. I had to soak them, or my mom would come home and yell at us. So I think we just need to be less classist. I don't know what it is.
No,
it's an equity thing of
It is, yeah.
when Noma does it, it's cool. When
Well,
Noma.
that's a whole different conversation. But I do think it goes back to the conversation I had with Peter earlier of demonizing farmers for whatever. We demonize poor people's foods. And then, all of a sudden, white people discover them, these indigenous food cultures, and they're like, this is what you should eat now. Yeah. And it's this very effed up way of thinking about food that needs to change. And I know you both are trying to do that and doing it well. Paul Newnham is a prophet. He goes across the world spreading not just beans is how, but the Chef's Manifesto. Talk a little bit more about it so people can feel that they can get involved.
Yeah, so when the UN set up the Sustainable Development Goals, it brought together lots of different intersecting areas. And as part of that, there was a lot of different elements of food. And so we started to look at that and say, how come in many of the food conversations, chefs are present, but they're actually out the back serving people, and they're not actually on the stage.
Right.
And they're not actually communicating and talking. And we said, yet on our media, whenever we open our phone or turn our TV on, there's chefs telling us all kinds of things. And so one of the things we realized is that there was a lot of competing voices there about you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And there wasn't an integrated conversation around how does this all join up? And so we worked with chefs in 35 countries at the time to co-create a framework tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which has turned into an 8-point plan with actions under it that chefs around the world can get engaged in. And there's chefs now in 90 countries around the world that are engaged in driving the action in their own kitchens. And it's not just fine dining. We have a fairly liberal view of chefs. It's people in full-time cooking and employment. And so we go right down to a food truck operator, a school canteen staff member. People will argue, I'm not a chef. And you go, well, you are cooking every day.
Right.
And you may not have been classically trained, but you probably have got more skill than many that were classic. So we try and be inclusive in the way that we open that up. And we try and do what I think you were getting at, Chef, is that this dialogue where we learn from one another. Mm-hmm. So where you pull out an issue and you say, okay, so how does this look in Nigeria versus in Peru versus in Mexico versus in Australia? Because often we have the answers, we just sometimes don't recognize them. We don't recognize what we're really good at until somebody else calls it out. Mm-hmm. And when somebody else calls it out, then you go, yeah, I've just grown up doing that. Yeah. But it's kind of cool. Yeah. And so what we try and do is celebrate that and try and give that a platform and celebrate that. And so we tell stories, we amplify, we encourage, but then we also bring chefs together to learn from one another.
I really love that, because when I read a story about another chef, I don't get angry like, oh no, they're paying livable wages. If you want to compete, please, by all means, compete with me on being the chef who pays the people the most, the chef who co-signs apartments, co-signs cars.
Right.
Like, the restaurant industry needs us just as much as we need them.
Absolutely. One sort of final question, and Chef Blue brought it up. And Olivia, you're very young. I know how old Paul is, but like we need
very old,
not old. we need more folks to pass on these culinary traditions that are not just the Mediterranean diet that gets uplifted as that's what everyone, if you want to be healthy, you should be eating. There are all these different food traditions that are so amazing for people's health, including in Mexico and elsewhere. How do we encourage young folks to want to get into culinary in a way that they feel that they will get a living wage, that they feel honored, respected?
I think that's what I'm working to work with other chefs in town. I really love what you've got resource-wise so that we can try to have these conversations. And even with Chef Jay, just recently we were talking about mentorship and giving people those opportunities, but also the wages so that they can stay in the business.
Right.
Because a lot of people in my past experience, I've lost 3 chefs. One's an actuary, one's a BA in business. Like, all these people went off and got degrees. I don't have one, but they did because I paid them enough to do it.
Sure, that's wonderful. Any final thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, look, I really support that. I think it's celebrate them, ask questions, really celebrate the craft that they bring to the table and to the kitchen, and that is inspiring. And then all of a sudden people go, it's amazing. There's like so many thousand ingredients, so many different cuisines, so much rich tradition from indigenous communities that you can dig into. I mean, it's an amazing space, and it engages our sense of taste, which is that additional level. Who wouldn't want to be a chef?
The bear showed us all that everyone wants to be a chef, or with one. But
Well, Chef Olivia, you've showed me that everyone should be a chef. Thank you so much for all the deliciousness you have created and all the joy. You put up with a lot from Food Tank. Thank you.
Thank you for choosing me, and thank you for working with me and the way that we work. I love our relationship. I love that you discover all these amazing ingredients for us to play with and challenge me with. I love it, and I hope you guys are here for the next one because we've got tastings coming. So.
Woo, yeah, you can't leave. We love you. Thank you, Paul. Bigger round of applause, please. Thanks.